Hello and welcome to another episode of The Culture Gym with Gareth Shackleton and Carly Richards. Please click the subscribe button to get updates on the next episodes of The Culture Gym. And we love to have you here listening to our show every week. Good morning, Carly. How are you?
Good morning. I'm really good. We're on week 9 already.
Week 9. I'm glad you remembered. I'm losing track.
Yeah. No, I only know because I've got it in my notes.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose track once I get to 10 because that's
more fingers. Well, how's your week been, Gareth?
Yeah, good. I'm on holiday next week, so I've been in that holiday preparation mode of clearing the decks, getting everything done, making sure all clients are sorted for next week when they have enough homework to be getting on with. And so in wind down mode now, just getting ready to pack things up and leave.
That's great. I've kind of been doing the opposite. I'm getting ready for some new opportunities at work, which are exciting. It was my wedding anniversary this week, so I took a couple of days off. Very good. Now I'm kind of getting back into it because the kids are going to be back to school soon.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
If there's any parents listening with school-age children, perhaps you will be celebrating with me. Although we've had a lovely time during lockdown, I must admit. We've been very lucky and had a great time. But yeah, opposite to you, I think.
Homeschooling is a topic we can probably discuss at length at some point. It's been an interesting experience for lots of people, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. No longer will I dread the 6 weeks summer holidays because I won't know what to do with them. Although dread's probably far too extreme a word. I don't dread the holidays, but I do wonder, what will we do for 6 weeks?
Yeah.
But after 6 months, 6 weeks seems like an absolute doddle.
Yeah, it'll be a breeze next time around.
Yeah. So
that'll be good for the kids to get back as well to some kind of normality, and hopefully the infection levels don't spike again and they can get a full year this year.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, I think all children will be looking forward to seeing their friends. They might be nervous about going back to school, which mine are, but I think that's perfectly normal. And they are also looking forward to certain things like seeing their friends and, seeing teachers even.
Yeah.
So be nice. It'll be good for them.
Very good. So we have a topic today. We're going to talk about flow.
We are.
Yeah, psychological flow. I think we should perhaps qualify what we're actually going to be talking about. It's not the flow of water or other things.
No.
So psychological flow, what is it? Why is it relevant to the workplace? And why should we be encouraging it?
Yeah, indeed. So this is something that I know you're very interested in and have done an awful lot of reading around. It's something that I have covered in my studies and my kind of background to occupational psychology. And you know more about one particular researcher and I know a little bit more about another particular researcher. But I think in terms of how flow fits into organizations and why we should be focusing on flow and thinking about flow, we have similar sort of questions around it all and thoughts. So why don't you kick off by telling us exactly what flow is or what the research tells us that flow is?
Yeah. Okay. So, I guess one of the things my interest in flow is, starts with the question, is it real? And I won't explain why that's a question, but let's dig into some of the research and then we can maybe answer that question as we go. So the concept of flow starts with a researcher, from my point of view anyway, called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And you have to really practice for a long time to be able to say that name. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is Hungarian by origin, but emigrated to America, did all his research there. And he started with some research into play and what is play, looking at kids playing, but then also wondering, why do adults play? You know, there's no purpose to play other than engagement in the activity itself. There's no particular goal involved in, you know, even playing chess, other than, you know, maybe competitiveness, but it's the activity itself which is the goal, is the motivation to take part. And he realized that that was a very strange thing in terms of motivation theory at the time, back in the 70s, and the way that psychology was going with behaviorism. And so he started to research it in more depth and realized that play, but also other activities like mountain climbing, but even work, people become engaged and absorbed in what they're doing. And there's a certain level of enjoyment involved with it as well, which perhaps not in the moment, but you realize afterwards, I really enjoy doing that. And he started to define what this state was and realized that he could describe it as a phenomenon that was discrete from other psychological phenomenon. Lots of long, difficult words in here, not just his name. So he started to define it, and I think you've got a good definition of flow, just a one-liner there.
Yeah. So I'm talking about a guy called Arnold Backer.
Okay.
2 Ks. And I don't know whether this is a direct quote, but certainly he suggests that it's a state of total immersion in an activity that's intensely enjoyed. Yep. But then we talked about enjoyment and how do we know whether people are in fact enjoying it, and is enjoyment as more of a kind of self-perceived concept. What one person deems enjoyable may not be enjoyable to somebody else, but then could that be dependent upon the activity that they're in that state of flow doing? There's also, you know, that motivation comes into it as well in other definitions too. So, yeah. Yeah,
and enjoyment's interesting. So I think, you know, in Csikszentmihalyi's version of what flow is, enjoyment doesn't feature as much as it does in Backer's version, I think. It's there, it's an element, and it's considered, but it's not quite so, you know, that idea of intense enjoyment's not the same. It's enjoyment, but at a much lower level of, what's the psychological term? It's not valence, it's intensity. It's that effect level. So then there are some conditions in which flow that are needed in order to enter into flow. And I think this is important from a work point of view, because 3 of the conditions which are important are around the demands of the activity being matched by the resources that the person has for those demands. So if the demands and the resources are matched, you can enter into flow. If there's a mismatch, if demands are too high, then you'll probably end up in a kind of stressed state. And if the demands are too low for the resources that the person has, you end up in a bored state. So flow become, in the work setting at least, perhaps in other settings, becomes this idea of optimal performance or optimal experience. And I think there are 2 differences there. There's a difference between optimal experience and optimal performance. Many people conflate the 2 and try to say that, you know, entering into flow is about optimal performance, and it's not necessarily the case, I don't think. We need to dig into the research a bit more on that one. But many people push the idea of flow in the workplace as this idea of improving performance, because you can reach a state of optimal performance. And it may be true in some cases, but not all. But certainly it's important, you know, if we're looking at people and how we manage and lead people, we want to match up their resources, what they have available, both physical resources, but also their mental and mindset resources with the task in hand, with the demands of the task. That will help them to perform that task more effectively, have a better experience in doing that, so they want to do it more and better next time. So hopefully there's a performance benefit to helping our employees to achieve flow. So that's two of the three. And the third aspect is control. There needs to be this sense that you're in control of what you're doing. If you're getting lots of interruptions, lots of distractions, lots of, the supervisor keeps on coming to you and asking you to change what you're doing, so you don't feel in control of the activities, then that's going to impede flow. So I think those three areas there are really important from a workplace point of view and from a culture point of view.
Yeah.
Are we providing appropriate demands to our employees who have the resources matched to those demands, and do we give them control and some level of autonomy over the work that they're doing in order to help them to achieve optimal experience and optimal performance?
Yeah. It's interesting as well how similar, in a lot of ways that flow is discussed, how similar the concept is to engagement in work.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot, not just on the podcast, but I think in general, there's awful lot, there kind of seems to be a bit of a buzzword around the word engagement at the minute. So, it's discussed an awful lot in the workplace. How do we engage our employees, and how do we ensure that we can maintain that level of engagement? And I think it's very, in terms of the way that's discussed, it's similar to the word flow. Certainly, some of the research is geared towards flow being something that's very personal, and it talks about the individual rather than creating more of a kind of, I suppose, culture of flow, which is something that's very interesting to us because and leaders and employers out there, because certainly we want to know how do we enable our employees to first of all get into a state of flow, become engaged in the work, and then get into a state of flow. I personally, for me, I see being engaged in a piece of work as kind of first level, and then moving on to a deeper level of a state of flow in terms of you're really immersed in it rather than just engaged in it. You're absolutely immersed into it. And so how do employers enable that to then continue once we've created it? And you've obviously mentioned a few things there. Environment, I think, is something that they can think about. So we need to make sure that people have the correct balance between resources and demands, and also creating this appropriate work environment to ensure that minimal distractions, which brings us on to the interesting concept of open offices. And there's an awful lot of research come out in more recent years after the big boom of open offices that suggests actually maybe we should have rethought that, because it's not such a productive atmosphere, and they aren't what we kind of gain in terms of the reduced costs in creating an open office. We probably lose in performance and well-being, because actually they can be very stressful environments. I've certainly been into workplaces where the initial wow factor of this office is amazing, it's all modern and glass everywhere and looks great, but then you kind of sit down and think, okay, particularly in industries like tech industries, where people do tend to get into a state of flow, especially if they're more introverted, and you kind of think, right, this is very individual work. So then if someone's got to work solely on their own and there's little need for collaboration, although you could argue there's always a need for collaboration, that proves very difficult to people working in open offices, particularly if they're more introverted.
Yeah.
And if we have spaces where people can go to have a meeting, I've walked into spaces that are glass walls. So then you're never completely private. You're never even in a meeting room. If you were having a private meeting, an appraisal, for example, or you wanted to talk to your boss about something that was particularly difficult, something that had gone on at home, and you were going to be visibly upset, you wouldn't want your colleagues to know, yet you're in a completely glass canister and everyone can see it. And so I think environment is something that's really important. And certainly if you're listening now and considering moving to an open office after lockdown and being separated, and you're thinking we need to all come together, I would certainly look into what the research says and just be mindful that that's probably not going from one extreme to the other is probably not the best option. Because it's not always productive, and it certainly doesn't allow for a state of flow very easily.
Well, it could be an inhibitor to flow. That's right. I guess by definition, flow would, when you enter into a state of flow, you can block out distractions. That's part of the definition. However, entering into that state probably requires, a reduced level of distraction, so that you can enter into the state. So it's probably not going to be a promoter of flow. And then every interruption, of course, interrupts the flow state. So, and we can go into all sorts of depth on this. There's all sorts of angles, and it's really fascinating. One of the things is that, should you be in flow all of the time? And the answer is probably no. You need to go, you need to have this variable state of being where you enter into flow, you stay there for a period of time. It could be 30 minutes, it could be several hours, but then you come into a different state, probably a more relaxed state, because flow could be quite an intense experience, quite intense concentration. And in order to have true well-being, we probably need to have the ability to enter into flow and then come out of flow, then enter it again, and have multiple states of periods of flow during the workday. So organising our work and our days around that as well, both as individuals and as a business.
And what strikes me is another interesting concept to do with flow, particularly for the moment, the current times are when people have been working from home. How have we been able to enter into that state, if at all? Particularly if people have distractions at home and they don't have an appropriate environment to work in. Perhaps they don't have a home office or even a desk. If they've got children at home, I've found it particularly difficult. I think there's been times where I've entered into a state of flow, but certainly not as often as I would do, because I generally work from home quite a lot. I haven't entered into that state as often as I would do when the children are at school, when my husband's at work, when we have that space, I suppose. And I don't just mean physical space, but mental space and capacity to be able to focus and engage in what you're doing, and then move that on to a deeper kind of more intensive level.
It's about having that mental distance from other things, isn't it? Because the state of flow is complete absorption in what you're doing. In order to get there, you probably need a certain level of distance mentally from other things, and then once you enter into flow, that distance increases, becomes greater. One of the interesting aspects of flow as a research topic is it's almost a circular thing. The conditions in order to create flow are almost the same as the the state that you're in flow. So you need to have this mental distance in order to enter flow. But flow is mental distance from other things, except the thing that you're engaged in.
Yeah, interesting. And also just talking about balance and you know, how we need to have, we shouldn't be in flow all the time. I suppose some people, maybe if they're working on, particularly at work, if they're working on quite an important project and it's taken up all of the bandwidth, but then is that healthy, or is that because of the pressure? Yeah, you need to get the balance right there. But also it should be something that we can enter into in our personal lives as well. And from a well-being perspective, that's very important in order to move away from work and to be able to switch off from work and actually switch into, this is me, this is personal time, this is family time, you know, reading a story to your children at bedtime, or I don't know what, or a hobby. You mentioned rock climbing earlier. I think it's all relative.
I think it's important to recognize that there are some dark sides to flow. You know, that a lot of the literature, particularly the popular literature on this, is about the positive sides of flow, the optimal experience, the optimal performance. But we have to be aware of the fact that too much flow could lead to addiction. You know, look at the idea of a workaholic, for example. And I think related to that, because there's some evidence that flow results in a dopamine hit in the brain. You know, the pleasure centers of the brain get this dopamine hit, hence the enjoyment. And you know, dopamine is related to elements of drug addiction as well. So you know, these kinds of ideas come together somewhat, and we have to be aware of the fact that if flow is releasing dopamine into the brain, that can become an addiction. And I think the other thing we have to be aware of, which isn't often talked about, is if you do enter into flow for too long and too often and too intensely, you know, that could lead to burnout.
Yes.
And, because there's also some research that flow is like is a stress state. It's not chronic stress as we think of chronic stress, with this elevated adrenaline and chronically elevated cortisol, but it is there is some research which shows that in a state of stress, your adrenaline levels go up, your cortisol levels go up, and that's akin to stress. So entering into flow for too long, too intensely, and too often could lead to this kind of state of burnout. So we don't want to be encouraging flow too much and too often and too intensely.
No.
Having this balance, this fluctuating experience. And so I think
what we're asking, sorry, carry on.
I think related to that is the idea of finding different ways of entering into flow. So it shouldn't be just about one thing, either in the workplace, but also, as you've said, having this work-life balance. So having multiple ways to achieve a flow state. Some of it at work, some of it at home with your family, some of it with hobbies. And then you can have this nice fluctuation throughout the day in different ways and for different reasons.
Yeah. I was just going to say, and you know, perhaps not leaving it on the positive note that we normally like to, but what we're asking of leaders and employers is quite a lot, really, in terms of flow. Particularly for leaders who have no experience in occupational or organizational psychology or coaching, or you know, or any form of understanding of these concepts that we're talking about, which we understand is, you know, quite challenging, but who really want to get the best from their employees. In which case, if you know, we're always available.
We can help, yeah. But I think the key is, you know, if we make it very simple, is what we've talked about before. It's having that sense of humanity and empathy.
Yes.
You know, and checking in with employees that they are enjoying what they're doing. They are achieving optimal experience sometimes. Because the more they achieve that optimal experience, again, not too much, but the more they're going to enjoy their work, the more they're going to engage, the better their output and productivity will be, the better it is for the business. So we can get into the deep psychology and biology of flow, but that just proves that it's real, I think.
Yeah.
Beyond that, it's about having that empathy with the people that you are responsible for.
I think it's just about doing the right thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Doing the right thing, which brings us onto our question. We didn't have time for a question last week, but this week we've got a few minutes left. We're trying to keep it round about the half-hour mark, aren't we? So, so the question this week is, what is Leavism? And this is certainly a concept that I talk a lot about in my work, but not everyone, when I talk about it, not everyone understands or even knows or ever heard of the word before. So the concept of so first of all, we've all heard of absenteeism, pretty much, I would assume. Absenteeism is basically when employees are absent from work. There's a concept called presenteeism, which is generally where people are showing up to work, but they're not sort of mentally, performance-wise, emotionally visible at work. So they're kind of switched off, if you like. Probably the opposite of flow. Yeah,
disengaged.
Very disengaged, yes. And then there's this concept of leavism, and you talked about burnout before. And interestingly, leavism is about when people don't take their annual leave, they become so immersed in their work, they decide not to take time off for whatever reason, because maybe they've got a lot on at work, maybe they're particularly stressed, so they want to get through all the tasks. Maybe they love their job, but when we don't take a break from work, even if we love the work, it can impact our stress levels. It can lead to burnout, and it does also impact things at home. So especially if we have partner, family, other family members or friends that kind of want to spend time with us and things, it can really impact those relationships and our home life. And we become unable to switch off from work and switch on to home life away from work. And that does also lead to burnout. So that supports your statement earlier on, where you said that being in a state of flow for too long, too often, can lead to burnout. And this concept of leavism is actually costing the economy billions, because I think certainly employees have a responsibility to take their annual leave, to take a break from work, to not only take their annual leave, but switch off and do something they enjoy, or do something with people that they love at home, all being well with lockdown, of course, when they aren't at work, and really try hard to switch off, whether that's physical exercise or whatever. But employers have a responsibility to ensure that people are having appropriate breaks from work. And ensure that those are, I know it's been difficult, certainly in recent times, but a lot of people aren't getting their annual leave because work has been so hectic. But we certainly moving on now that the things are starting to settle down. As employers, we certainly need to take that responsibility seriously and ensure that people are getting appropriate breaks after what has been a very difficult time.
Interesting to think about, the blending of home and work life over the last 4 or 5 months with lockdown and working from home, and how that's affected leavism. The inability perhaps for some people to get away from work, because it's always there. It's in their living room, their kitchen. It's there. But it's also a big problem for society as a whole at the moment, isn't it? Because of the always on culture that we have. We've got the mobile phone, we've got the tablets, computers at home. We can always check our emails. Text messages can come in from the boss or from a customer at any time of day or night. So it can be really difficult to switch off, and that's, I guess, a form of leavism as well.
Yeah, exactly. And if employers can do anything about that, then they should. I know certainly in France they have a complete ban on emails after a certain time of day. I can't remember the specific time, but they've taken that route, and I think that's the evidence suggests that that's definitely helped. So, you know, maybe that's an option. If not by law, certainly perhaps within your organization, that's something that you can begin by saying no emails, no messages, no work-related content at all after whatever time. But then that begs the question of, what about, certainly right now, if people are looking after their children during the day, what if they're choosing to work at night time, and then that impacts flexible working? And so I guess it's very much and as are all of these concepts, very much individual to the organization, to the employees, what works for those people, that group of people, that individual. And I guess it goes back to just using your common sense and doing the right thing.
It does, and analysing each business as an individual entity, you know, they've all got their own characteristics, and it's important to go in and assess them, or assess yourself.
Yeah.
Not necessarily benchmarking against other businesses, because that can be misleading and dangerous, comparing yourself to others. Mm-hmm. But looking at yourself, doing a deep analysis and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your organisation from an ability for employees to enter flow, to engage in the work that they're doing, to for the well-being of the people. Businesses are all about people, and doing that on an individual basis, not for some benchmark or framework that might exist out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. Well, that's all we've got time for. Just scratching the surface as ever on these topics, and so much more to delve into in future discussions, Carl.
Yeah, hopefully it's food for thought for everyone, though. You know, hopefully it just starts those thought processes off for people, and perhaps if anyone wants to know more, they can do their own digging, or they can ask us for more information, and we'll be happy to help.
Yeah, happy to talk to people about it.
Yeah.
Good. That's all we've got time for today. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the topics today. I certainly have.
Yeah, me too. Don't forget to subscribe. You'll get all our notifications for more chats.
Indeed. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.